Today we're up here in the beautiful British Columbia Mountains taking a look at the 2019 Acura RDX. The RDX is a very important vehicle for Acura. This is one of their best-selling models, and it's actually been the best-selling or second best-selling compact luxury crossover in America for the last few years. The RDX has had kind of an interesting history. When it was first launched back in 2007, it had a turbocharged engine under the hood, it had super handling all-wheel drive, and it didn't exactly meet everyone's sales expectations. Then in 2013, it was completely redesigned. It was bigger than before. It had a V6 engine under the hood instead of a turbocharged four-cylinder engine, and it actually lost the Acura super handling all-wheel drive system, which has been a hallmark of Acura vehicles for some time. But for 2019, Acura has decided to go all new, and actually, interestingly, back to their roots as well. This is a completely different vehicle. It's a total redesign, and we now find a four-cylinder turbocharged engine under the hood, and you guessed it, Acura's super handling all-wheel drive system under the sheet metal as well. In another interesting twist, this was designed, engineered, and is also built in the United States, in Ohio to be exact. Acura tells us that the 2019 RDX was the first Acura designed from the very beginning to have their new corporate diamond-shaped grille. This is a very attractive look in my opinion for Acura. Let me know what you think about it down there in the comment section below. I have to say that this design language also works very well on the existing Acuras that they have tweaked in order to accommodate the new look. So although this has been grafted onto the MDX and the RLX and of course the TLX, I don't think that those vehicles really lack anything that this vehicle is bringing to the table. It's a very, very attractive design any way you look at it. Taking a closer look at the headlamps, you'll see that we have this LED turn signal strip integrated right there on the top. The low beam modules are the ones on the outboard side, the high beam modules are the ones on the inboard side, and then we have a distinctive daytime running lamp strip at the bottom of the headlamp with this little kink right down here. It is a little bit difficult to see that during the day. At 186.9 inches long, the RDX has grown by about 2.5 inches versus the last generation. And most of that is actually found in the wheelbase. So that's the distance between the front wheels and the back wheels. That's up 2.6 inches. Some of you on Facebook were a little confused about where the RDX fits in the automotive landscape. This is not a BMW X1 or Volvo XC40 competitor. Those are actually smaller than this. Those are subcompact luxury crossovers. This is a compact luxury crossover. So this is right about the same size as the Volvo XC60, Mercedes-Benz GLC, BMW X3, etc. Although, thanks to the additional length that we see for 2019, this is actually now one of the largest in this segment. That's what allows Acura to give us class-leading cargo room and class-leading rear seat legroom. Although the overall profile of the RDX does limit headroom in the back seats just a little bit. Moving to the rear, it's obvious that Acura was going after a clean and elegant look. We have tail lamp modules that merge from the body on over to the trunk lid. These are partial LED elements. So the turn signal lamps that you can see flashing right there are not LEDs, but the rest of the tail lamp module is. At the bottom of the bumper, we find twin exhaust tips, even though we do have a four-cylinder engine under the hood, well-integrated parking sensors on the back, and if you get the A-Spec trim, we get a slightly different rear bumper. It actually has aero fins integrated into the bottom. In a way, Acura has gone back to basics under this hood because the RDX started out with a turbocharged four-cylinder engine, then we had a blip with the second generation where we had a naturally aspirated V6. This is an all-new 2-liter turbocharged four-cylinder producing 272 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque. This is essentially the same 2-liter four-cylinder that we find under the hood of the absolutely insane Civic Type R, although we get a little bit less power under this hood. Power is actually a little bit lower than last year as well. 7 horsepower less than the old 3.5-liter V6, but we get 28 pound-feet of torque more, and the torque happens at considerably lower RPMs. In addition to that, we have more of a torque plateau than a torque peak, so torque stays on longer. Sending power to the front wheels or to all four wheels is a brand new 10-speed automatic transmission that is the first in this particular segment, and of course, you can now get Acura's super handling all-wheel drive system. At this point, we ought to talk a little bit about super handling all-wheel drive because this is a very different all-wheel drive system than the 2018 RDX received or than the all-wheel drive system that most of the front-wheel drive-based competition uses. Super handling all-wheel drive has been a defining characteristic of the Acura brand for some time, and what makes it different is that this vehicle can send up to 70% of engine power to the rear wheels or actually even to a single rear wheel even when there is no wheel slip up front. And that is quite different than most of the competition's all-wheel drive systems. You'll notice that some of these systems from General Motors or from Infiniti or from Volvo will say that they can send 100% of engine power to the rear. And that is true, but in order to do that, the front wheels have to slip. This system will obviously send 100% of engine power to the rear axle as well if the front wheel is slipping, but that's not required to send 70% to the rear. The way that the Acura system does this is quite interesting. You see, with most all-wheel drive systems, if you lock the coupling in the center together, then the input shaft of the front wheels and the rear wheels are spinning at the same rate. Each axle is getting 50% of the power. Now, if the front wheels start to slip, then it could send more to the rear. If the rear wheels slipped, more could go to the front when that coupling is completely locked. But this is a little bit different. The coupling in this vehicle is also combined with an overdrive gear that actually makes the rear wheels spin ever so slightly faster than the front wheels. That ability to overdrive the rear wheels slightly versus the front wheels is the key to the performance of the super handling all-wheel drive system, because this vehicle can have a rear wheel drive dynamic out on the road under certain conditions when the front wheels still have traction. And that's not something that we'll see in the Volvo XC60, for instance, or the Lexus NX. Front seat comfort is an area where the RDX fell behind the European competition. It's important to keep in mind, however, that the previous RDX was considerably less expensive, of course, but things are different for the 2019 RDX. We actually have one of the more comfortable seats in this segment, thanks to an all-new driver's seat and passenger seat design that gives us four-way adjustable lumbar support, inflatable side bolsters, and a power-extending thigh cushion. Now, you will find this only on the top-end trims, but all versions of the RDX do have much more comfortable seats than last year. We also have a tilt-telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion. These seats are not quite as comfortable as the Volvo XC90's optional seats, but this is going to cost you significantly less than the Volvo. I do appreciate the fact that that passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver's seat, because that's a question I get asked a lot, even in my own house, when I'm driving a vehicle and that front passenger seat is just not as comfortable as the driver's seat. Sitting right here behind myself at 6 feet tall, you can see I have about 5 or 6 inches of legroom left. Now, on the downside, headroom does appear to be more limited than some of the competitors, because if I sit upright in this back seat, my hair is brushing the ceiling, and we don't see that in all of the competition. A key factor here is that this large panoramic moonroof, which is really, really large, mind you, is actually standard in the RDX. So there's no option to not get this and get a little bit more headroom. It's a little bit more noticeable if I move over to the middle seat, which is a little bit higher off the ground. My hair is still definitely brushing the ceiling, and it feels just a little bit closer there. I actually can't put my hand between my head and the ceiling. But if I move over to the right side, you'll notice that we still have a great deal of legroom. This front seat's all the way back in its tracks. I still have about 1.5 inches left. So when it comes to legroom, this is absolutely excellent. But when it comes to headroom, there may be some better options out there. Because of the overall dimensions and, of course, the front-wheel drive layout of this vehicle, we have a very large cargo area for this segment at just under 30 cubic feet of storage capacity. This is notably larger than something like the Volvo XC60 or the Mercedes-Benz GLC. It actually manages to even beat the BMW X3, which is quite a practical crossover. You will still find a spare tire in the RDX, although it is actually located under the cargo area. That gives us this very deep storage well, you can see right there, where you can almost keep a piece of roller luggage like that underneath the load floor. Now, in front of that area, there's some additional storage space. So if I lift that up again, we have another storage area there, and then you'll find the jack and tow hooks under that other compartment. In a practical touch, releasing the rear seatbacks can be done either via a lever right there on top of the seat, or from this one right back here in the cargo area, making it a lot easier to put cargo inside. As we look around the interior, keep in mind that we are in the top-end trim, although again, all models do have the large panoramic moonroof. One of the interesting touches in this cabin are the roof speakers. We find those right up here for the front passengers at the front of that moonroof, and then right next to the grab handles for the rear passengers. These help elevate the soundstage and give us a little bit better sound imaging. This vehicle does have the optional Panasonic ELS sound system. We have four-way adjustable headrests for the driver and the front passenger. The button on the headrest is used for the forward-backward motion, and then we have a button down here to raise and lower the headrest. The model that we're driving has the top-end Napa leather upholstery. You can see we have quite an interesting design there with different perforations in the center and outboard positions. These seats are both heated and ventilated, and the side bolsters are adjustable in terms of their inflation. If we move on over to the front doors, we find a large portion of the door covered in soft touch material. Although, as is pretty typical in this segment, the bottom of the doors is cast from hard plastics. We have real wood trim over here on the front of the door. That's a new thing for the Acura RDX. We've seen this in some of Acura's newest models lately, and that's carried on over into this trim. There's a lot of variation going on in the wood. It's very attractive. It's not quite an open pore, but it's not as highly polished as some of the competition's woods either. That wood trim extends on over to the dashboard, where we have a soft touch upper injection molded section, some stitch sections below that, and then soft touch materials lower on the dashboard. The glove compartment is a slot style glove compartment. We have two different storage cubbies right there, one where you could put the owner's manual, something like that, and then a larger storage area at the bottom. I was not able to fit a large tablet computer inside, however. In the center of the dashboard, we have an all-new large LCD infotainment system. This is not just a new screen for Acura, but the software is entirely new as well. If you want to know more about this particular system, I will have a complete video on how this functions on my channel, likely before this video. So you may have already seen it, or you may be able to click over to it very shortly. At the vehicle's launch, this screen will support Apple CarPlay. Android Auto will come a little bit later because Google is still working on some of the interface details for this particular vehicle. Right below that, we have the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control system, as well as the controls for the heated and ventilated seats. There's also an auto mode there to heat and cool the seats based on the temperature you've selected and the outdoor temperature. There's a power volume knob right there, track forward, backward. Then below that, we have this very large dynamic mode button. This is the only thing that I think is a little bit unusual in this cabin, is the positioning of this mode button. This changes us between Sport, Sport Plus, Comfort, and of course, Snow. In the model that we're driving, this affects not only the engine transmission, but also the available adaptive dampers. There's a button to disable the auto start-stop system, and then we have the same sort of gear change buttons that we've seen in Acura models for some time. If I put my foot on the brake, there's drive right there, neutral, reverse. We actually toggle sort of back towards the back of the vehicle, and then we press the P button for park. This touchpad is the reason that Apple CarPlay is available now and Android Auto will be available later, because Apple has already released software to use this to interface with the CarPlay system, but Google has not. This is quite different than the touchpad that we see in the Lexus models. If you want to know more about this, again, click on over to that complete infotainment review. I go into that in great detail. Behind the touchpad, we have a small wrist rest, and then behind that, we have a roller cover that opens to reveal two large cup holders, a storage slot right there, and a USB input. This is the USB input that you would use to interface your USB media device or your smartphone with the system. The other USB ports in this cabin are charge only. You'll find one of those charge only ports right there under this center console section. This is actually a storage area. You'll see there's a 12-volt power outlet, the auxiliary input, and then on the other side, there's a USB charge only port that is large enough to fit some small purses, but not things that are too large. Between the front seats, we have a padded leather armrest. This opens to reveal a fairly small storage compartment. The reason this is a little on the small side is because so much room is taken up by these large cup holders and the storage area right there. There wasn't too much left for that storage cubby. LCD instrument clusters may be all the rage for the Europeans, but Acura has decided to go a little bit more traditional on the driver's side with a physical speedometer and tachometer, and then a color multifunction display between those two elements. This gives us things like our trip computer information. We also get some additional gauge readouts, navigation turn-by-turn directions, vehicle maintenance, tire pressure, the status of the super handling all-wheel drive system, and some ability to adjust the sport gauge settings. If I toggle the car into Sport Plus mode, you'll notice I get a turbo boost gauge up there on top and then an acceleration gauge over here on the right. Since we're driving the top end trim, our model also has a fully featured heads-up display. This display is a little bit difficult to film, of course, on camera, but we do have access to a wide variety of different car functions, and you can actually add car functions from the infotainment display in the center console into this display. So if you want the shortcut to be able to click over to Bluetooth audio or your Apple CarPlay input, or you don't want that in this display, you can actually add or remove them. We also have turn-by-turn navigation directions, and of course, as you can see there, the status of the lane keeping system, the radar cruise control, speed limit information, and your current speed. The steering wheel is a new 3-spoke design. We have shift paddles on the back and sport grips up top. You'll find the controls for the infotainment system over here on the left. We have a power button right over here. There's a volume up, down, track, forward, backward button, heated steering wheel button, voice command button, and then the apps button, the back button, and this toggle also control the heads-up display that we see above the steering wheel. On the right side of the wheel, we find the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control and a button to turn on and off the lane keeping assistance system. In case you're wondering, there are a few more controls to the left of the driver. This is where you'll find the buttons to adjust the heads-up display, turn off the lane departure mitigation system, turn on and off the brake hold system, and of course the electric parking brake and parking sensors. One of the complaints about the second generation RDX, which is the one that this is replacing, is that the RDX had gone from being one of the more exciting entries to something that was just a little bit too ordinary, and that was definitely something that Acura was interested in fixing with this all-new third generation, and they definitely have. The turbocharged 4-cylinder engine and the 10-speed automatic transmission work very well together, and they definitely feel peppier than the outgoing 3.5-liter V6. Now, we're testing this car right now up here in British Columbia. We're at 2,400 feet above sea level, so keep that in mind when we start talking about our acceleration numbers. This model's preliminary score, again not done on our own home test track, was 5.9 seconds 0 to 60. That's in and of itself very respectable for the compact crossover segment, but I expect that once we get this home, it should be about 2 to 3/10 of a second faster. That's because although turbocharged engines do work well at elevation, the elevation increase still affects their performance. That likely means that in terms of overall acceleration getting onto the highway, this is going to be a little bit faster than the 2018 RDX, but the bigger difference really is in passing maneuvers, because we have more gears to choose from, so it's a little bit easier for this system to find the right gear for that passing maneuver and get you up and over that hill or up and around that car. The design of this 10-speed automatic is more traditional than the 9-speed automatic we see in the other Acura models, and that's why this transmission feels much smoother and much more as you'd expect an automatic to feel. I really hope that this automatic transmission makes its way to other Acura vehicles very soon, because this definitely has all the advantages of the 9-speed with none of the disadvantages. The big reason that Acura used the 9-speed automatic in those other vehicles is because we have a very aggressive first gear and then a very tall final gear to help give you excellent highway fuel economy as well as excellent acceleration. And that's exactly what we see in this 10-speed automatic as well. This is quite different than, for instance, Ford or General Motors 10-speed, which doesn't have a very wide spread between its first gear and its final gear. The aggressive first gear is definitely noticeable when you're first taking off. Now obviously there is still turbo lag, just like you find in any turbocharged engine, but after that initial turbo spool up, you definitely get a good strong acceleration. In terms of braking tests, our preliminary score came in at 119 feet, 60 miles an hour back to zero, which puts this definitely in the thick of things for the base and mid-level trims of the competition. This is right around the same that you'll find in a Lexus NX300, a BMW X3, or most versions of the Volvo XC60. Unfortunately, Acura did not have any of the front-wheel drive models of the RDX to play with out here in Canada. I think that's a pity. I really would have been interested to see what that felt like out on the road. So instead, we've been spending most of our time in this super handling all-wheel drive model. As I said earlier in the video, super handling all-wheel drive is different than the all-wheel drive system that we find in other front-biased vehicles in the segment. And that's because this can send more engine power to the rear even when there is no slip. So even around this very gentle corner here, if I floor it, we're going to get a little bit more power to the rear left wheel than we would in those other systems. That's because in addition to sending more power to the rear, this system will also torque vector across the rear axle. For the RDX, that affects power on handling. So if we're really pressing this hard out on your favorite winding mountain road and you're in the corner with the throttle on, that's when you're really going to notice super handling all-wheel drive doing its thing. Now, because we still have the majority of the weight in the front of the vehicle, in neutral handling situations, this is going to feel more like the other front-heavy vehicles in this segment. So more like a Q5, which interestingly enough also has a great deal of weight up front, or an XC60, or the Lexus NX. Although it's worth noting that the Volvo is much lighter up front than it has ever been before, so in terms of neutral handling, it actually is a little bit closer to the BMW and the Mercedes. The dynamics of super handling all-wheel drive can give the RDX something of a split personality, but it is very, very similar to the Audi Quattro system that we find in the Q5, because dynamics are very similar between the two vehicles. Both of them can send a majority of the engine power to the rear when they want to, but they can also send power up front, and both vehicles end up being a little heavier on the front axle than the other German competitors. When it comes to our overall handling score, I'm going to give this particular model an A-. That's because this does very, very well in mid-level and base comparisons, but when you start comparing this to top-end trims of the competition, it's not going to handle as well. Obviously, that's a little tricky because those are going to cost thousands and thousands more, but something like an SQ5, a GLC 43 AMG, or Volvo's own XC90 T8, those will handle better than the model that we're driving here. But again, they're going to cost an awful lot more. One thing that I really appreciate with this model is the new adaptive suspension system, because it really helps soften things out when you're on a poor road surface. That helps give this a much better ride than something like the Lexus NX. I think that the NX is just a bit too firm for my tastes, and the variable suspension system really helps smooth things out in this vehicle. It gives you a good balance between sporty dynamics when you want them and a comfortable ride when you need it. The suspension is controlled via this dynamic mode button right here in the center console. So if I move that over to Sport Plus and put the transmission into Sport, you'll definitely notice a difference in the way the RDX behaves. It's going to hold those gears much more aggressively, the throttle tip-in is also more aggressive, and the suspension really firms up a great deal. But even in the Sport Plus mode, the suspension is actually still fairly livable. So this is not going to be as rock hard as some of the competition's sport models. And again, that is actually something that I prefer. I prefer vehicles that are more middle of the road than a little bit too far on one extreme or the other. Acura tells us that a quiet cabin was very important when developing this vehicle, and they also tell us they were benchmarking the mainline European competitors. They tell us that they were specifically benching the Audi Q5, which I actually think is interesting because I don't think the Q5 is the quietest in this segment. When we've tested them, the Mercedes-Benz GLC appears to be a little bit quieter. That said, however, this cabin is still very quiet, and our preliminary sound score comes in at 70 decibels, which definitely puts this among the quieter entries. Now, when you're starting to climb the hills, we do get a little bit more engine noise into the cabin than in some of the competition, but I actually think this is an excellent sounding 4-cylinder turbo. Acura tells us that this top-end trim of the RDX is actually quieter than the other RDX models, so you do need to keep that in mind if you're shopping for a trim other than this top-end model. That's because Acura put more sound deadening material, just a little bit more attention overall to sound deadening in this top-end trim to help it compete more with those mainline and upper-end trims of the competition. It's a little bit difficult to gauge fuel economy because, of course, we have been driving this up here in British Columbia around these mountain passes, and we haven't had it at home or on very many long highway stretches. But our fuel economy average has been around 20 miles per gallon. Keep in mind that we are driving the model with super handling all-wheel drive, so I expect 23 miles per gallon combined should be attainable depending on your balance of highway and city driving. Again, we'll know more when we get this on our own home turf. Bottom line, out on the road, the previous generation RDX didn't quite feel like it fit in with the rest of the luxury crowd. It just didn't drive quite like the Volvo or the Audi or the Mercedes, etc. But this new generation RDX really has upped the bar for Acura because this really does feel more engaging out on the road. This is the kind of car that really wants you to start pushing it harder on your favorite winding mountain road, and that's exactly what we see out of a lot of those German options. Along the same lines as Volvo with the XC60, Acura marches to a slightly different drummer in this segment. They weren't trying to duplicate a BMW X3, and I actually find that quite refreshing. I like the fact that the RDX has a personality of its own. I really appreciate the eagerness of the RDX out on the road, and I hope that Acura's recently announced turbocharged V6 makes its way under this hood pretty soon. Now let's get to the nitty-gritty. Starting price is $37,300 for the base front-wheel drive model. Now, it is important to keep in mind that Acura Watch is standard on all trims. That includes radar adaptive cruise control, the lane keeping assistance system, autonomous braking, etc. Although we recently saw a similar move from Lexus with the Lexus NX, the majority of the entries in this segment do not have all of those active safety gadgets and goodies standard in the base trim. So if you want those active safety gizmos on the European entries, for instance, you are going to have to pay more. The only exception for that is the Volvo XC60, which has some of that standard on the base model, but not everything. Radar adaptive cruise control is still optional. The trim line is pretty easy to understand on the RDX for 2019. After the base model, there is the tech package. That's $40,500 for the front-wheel drive model, $42,500 for the all-wheel drive. Then we have the advanced model that we're driving right here, $45,400 front-wheel drive, $47,400 absolutely fully loaded with all-wheel drive, and that's again what I've been driving today. There's also an A-spec version that will sit somewhere between the tech package and the advanced in terms of overall pricing. Performance in all models should be essentially the same. All-wheel drive models are likely going to be a little bit faster 0 to 60 than the front-wheel drive models, mainly because of traction. But if you want features like the heads-up display and the more comfortable seats that we've seen in this trim, you will have to step all the way up to the top level. As you'd expect from Acura, the RDX is one of the best values in this segment, but it is actually not the least expensive. A base QX50 will set you back $36,550, so less than the base RDX. And the Lexus NX is also less expensive at just under $36,000. Now the NX has a strong value proposition as well because it has many of the same advanced safety technologies standard on it that we see in the Acura RDX. Although honestly, the Acura RDX is considerably more attractive inside and outside than the Lexus. The RDX is also notably more powerful and just better to drive all the way around. This is an awful lot more engaging than what we see in the Lexus, and real-world fuel economy appears to be better in this than the NX 300T as well. The only real downside that I noticed to the RDX is that if you have a family of taller people, they may have troubles fitting in the back row of this vehicle because of the overall roofline and the fact that that large panoramic moonroof is standard. Now for my family that wouldn't be a problem because I would just stick the tallest person up front. Nobody else is quite that tall, so they would be just fine on the inside, but it is something that you should probably keep in mind. I think compensation for that is this absolutely excellent cargo area back here. It is large, it is spacious, and we still have that spare tire under the vehicle, which is something that I really appreciate. It was really important that Acura get the RDX right for 2019, and I really think they have. This is an absolutely excellent value in its base trim, and it's also a very good value even in this top trim. And that's something that we don't see to the same extent out of the Lexus NX or the Infiniti QX50, even though they start less than the Acura RDX. This top-end trim has very comfortable seats. We have that passenger seat that moves in the same range of motion as the driver's seat. We also have excellent performance under the hood and real wood trim inside the cabin for the first time in the RDX. The combination of all those things put together mean that it's really a good solid competitor to the European entries. Now it is important to keep in mind that we don't have the same level of customization in this cabin of either options or colors that we find in many of the European entries. We also don't have as much power available under the hood, again, as those European options either. That said, however, the RDX is obviously going to be less expensive, and that's really, again, where that value proposition comes in. So if you're looking at spending under $50,000 on your next compact crossover, definitely put the Acura RDX on your shopping list. If you're on the fence between a 2018 and a 2019 RDX, without a doubt, don't buy the 2018, I'm sorry Acura, wait and buy the 2019 model. This will be available on dealer lots come June 1st, and you should start seeing dealer supplies increase by about July. And if you're worried about availability in the first few months, you probably shouldn't because again, this is actually built in America, so it doesn't have too long to get from the factory right to your dealer lot. Thanks for checking out this video. Be sure and let me know what you think about the 2019 RDX down there in the comments section below. Hit that subscribe button down there if you haven't already done so. Click up there to the top of your screen. If you want to support this channel, you'll be taken on over to Patreon. And of course, be sure to stay tuned over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos so you'll know when we have the RDX for a complete week so we can do our usual battery of tests, official 0 to 60 numbers, and of course our large comparison section as well. I'll see you later.